You ever wonder how to even begin to understand the massive, complicated machine that is our global economy? It's so easy to feel overwhelmed, right? Well, what if I told you that the key to its biggest secrets, its most fundamental principles, lies in something incredibly, incredibly small?
Yep, that's right. Let's talk about a single, humble pen. I know, sounds a little crazy. What on earth could this simple object possibly teach us about things like global trade and massive production chains? Turns out, a whole lot. It's actually the perfect place to start our journey into the hidden mechanics of the economy. And our journey kicks off with a really powerful idea, one made famous by the economist Adam Smith. It's a concept that completely changed how we make things, and it's called the division of labor. The idea is simple, but its effects are huge. Take one big, complicated job and break it down into many, many small ones. So instead of one person trying to build an entire car by themselves, or even make one single pin from start to finish, you split the process into these simple, repeatable steps. Each worker just becomes a master of one tiny piece of the puzzle. It sounds almost too simple, but the effect it has on productivity, well, it's absolutely revolutionary. Let's make this real for a second. Picture a factory that makes shirts. You don't have one person making a whole shirt, right? No way. The work is divided up. You've got one worker whose entire job, all day long, is just cutting the cloth. The next person over just does the stitching. Then you have an expert whose only job is adding the buttons, and a final person who just handles folding and packing. Each step is its own specialized job. And this is where we see the absolutely explosive power of this idea. Adam Smith, he actually observed that a single worker, doing everything themselves, might be able to make, say, 20 pins in a day. Maybe. But if you get 18 workers together, and each one performs just one or two simple steps, they don't make 360 pins. No, they can produce a staggering 48,000 pins in a single day. That's not just an improvement, that's a monumental leap. Now, of course, this incredible efficiency, it comes with a trade-off. The good stuff is obvious. Production just skyrockets, everything gets more efficient. But there's a human cost too. The work can become incredibly boring, monotonous. Workers can lose that sense of joy and pride that comes from creating a finished product. And it also introduces a serious risk. What happens to you if your one tiny specialized job is suddenly automated or just isn't needed anymore? So let's zoom out. What happens when you take this principle of specialization and you don't just apply it inside one factory, but across an entire region or even a whole country? Well, as you can imagine, the scale and the efficiency gets even bigger. You get something called the localization of industries. You can think of it as a territorial division of labor. I mean, think about it. There's a reason watchmaking is synonymous with Switzerland, right? Or why the tea industry is so heavily concentrated in a place like Assam. Entire regions become experts, developing these deep wells of knowledge, specialized supply chains, and a skilled workforce. They become powerful industrial hubs. And all this concentration unlocks another absolutely critical economic concept: economies of scale. In plain English, it just means that as you get bigger, the cost to produce each individual item can go down. A larger operation lets you get even more specialized, not just with your people, but with highly efficient, dedicated machinery built for one specific task. But scaling up with machines, that presents a really interesting puzzle. Okay, imagine you're running a factory. You've got 4 different machines, they're all essential to your process, but here's the catch. They all operate at different speeds. How in the world do you get them to work together efficiently without having some machines just sitting there idle, wasting time and money? Well, the answer lies in what economists call the principle of multiples. Just look at this table. If you only have one of each machine, you've got a major bottleneck with machine C, right? You're stuck producing just 20 units an hour. But when you scale up to a much bigger output, say 300 units per hour, something magical happens. You can have 6 of machine A, 5 of B, 15 of C, and 10 of D. And suddenly, bam, you have a perfectly balanced team of machines all humming along at full capacity. That's a level of efficiency that is literally impossible to achieve when you're small. So we've seen how we can make things more and more and more efficiently. But all this talk about efficiency begs a more fundamental question. Why do we even care so much about it in the first place? And this brings us to the single most important, the most foundational problem in all of economics. And that problem is scarcity. You know, simply put, we live in a world with limited stuff. There's only so much land, so many hours in a day, so much oil in the ground. But our wants, as humans, they're practically unlimited. And because we can't have everything we want, it forces us, as individuals and as entire societies, to make choices. The classic economic model to show this is guns versus butter. It's a simple way to represent the choice every nation has to make between spending on military defense or spending on things for its citizens. And as you can see from the table, it's all about trade-offs. If a society uses all its resources to make 20 million units of butter, it can't make any guns. If it decides it wants 5,000 guns, well, it has to give up 6 million units of butter. Every single choice has a cost. We can actually visualize this on a graph called the Production Possibility Frontier, or PPF for short. It's pretty straightforward. Any point that's right on this curve means the economy is running at peak efficiency. Any point inside the curve, that means it's being inefficient. Some resources are just being wasted. And any point outside the curve, well, that's simply impossible to get to with the resources and technology we have right now. And this idea of trade-offs leads us straight to another core concept: opportunity cost. The true cost of anything isn't the price on the tag, it's the next best thing you had to give up to get it. So the opportunity cost of producing more guns is all the butter that society couldn't make. Every single choice we make, big or small, carries this invisible price tag. Okay, so societies have to choose what to make because of scarcity. But what about us? How do we as consumers react to those choices, especially when it comes to price? This brings us out of the factory and into the marketplace, where our choices have a really powerful effect. Now, economists have this fantastic tool for this called price elasticity of demand. I know it sounds technical, but it's really just a fancy way of asking a simple question. How stretchy is our demand for something when its price changes? If the price of your morning coffee goes up by 10%, do you buy 10% less, or do you pretty much just grumble and buy it anyway? Let's just focus on the shape of these curves to really get it. That vertical line on the far left, that represents perfectly inelastic demand. Think of life-saving medicine. If you need it, you need it. The price doesn't really change your decision. Now, the horizontal line on the right is perfectly elastic. Imagine one brand of salt among a dozen identical ones. If its price goes up even a penny, demand just drops to zero. Most things we buy are somewhere in the middle. And this is exactly why it's so important. Look at these two graphs. In both cases, the supply of a product goes up by the exact same amount. But look at the result, it's totally different. On the left, with that rigid, inelastic demand, the price has to absolutely plummet to convince people to buy the extra product. But on the right, with that stretchy, elastic demand, the price only has to dip a little bit. The responsiveness of demand completely changes how the market reacts. It's fascinating. So what determines this stretchiness? Well, it usually comes down to a few key things. How many substitutes are available? Is the item a necessity, like gasoline for your commute? Or is it a luxury, like a fancy sports car? Does it eat up a huge chunk of your income? And finally, how much time do you have to adjust to a price change? All these factors come together to shape how we react in the marketplace. So we have covered a lot of ground. We started with one worker and the simple task of making a pin. We saw how the division of labor created this incredible explosion of productivity, watched that idea scale up to create specialized industries, and then we hit the fundamental economic wall of scarcity and choice. And finally, we explored this invisible force, elasticity, that shapes the constant dance between prices and what we buy in our markets. It's all connected, isn't it? From one person's tiny task all the way up to the massive, invisible forces that shape our world. Now that you can see these hidden mechanics at play, from opportunity cost to that stretchiness of demand, what economic choice, maybe one you make yourself or one you see in the news, will you look at differently tomorrow?